Hi, it's Peter Schweizer, and welcome to the Drill Down. Well, it looks like we might have a deal for TikTok, but is it a good one? We're going to talk about that today, what the deal is, who's involved, and the underlying issues that may or may not be addressed. And we're going to do that, of course, with the co-host of this program, 𝐃𝐫𝐤𝐥𝐥. Éric, it seems like they're going to save TikTok, and your dance videos on that platform are going to be safe.
No, we're precisely the right people to be having a discussion about TikTok, because you can count on 0 hands the number of TikTok accounts, Peter Schweizer, or TikTok videos we have been involved in. But I hate to tell you, #1 New York Times bestselling author, that you have buried the lead, unfortunately. Like, they have forced this sale of TikTok, but you forgot to mention why they have forced the sale of TikTok. Why are we even here in the first place? It's because this book over our shoulder right here, you wrote a book in which you exposed TikTok as one of the vehicles by which China continues to wage war against unsuspecting Americans, that created this very unique and unprecedented moment where both Republicans and Democrats in Congress said, hey, this seems like a bad idea. We should make them get rid of it, China. Joe Biden says, I agree. And even the Supreme Court says, yeah, you guys have a right to defend yourself from China. Yeah. And that's why we're here, right?
Yeah. Well, that's exactly right. And it's what the Chinese call cognitive warfare. And what's interesting about TikTok is a lot of people just assume it's another social media company like Facebook or Twitter. But in fact, it's more than that, because it's got the backing of the Chinese government. And we want to talk about that in the context of this deal that has been announced. So let's talk about the deal, what it entails. There's some interesting familiar faces who are part of this partnership. And we should be clear here, by the way, China is going to be licensing the algorithm, which is the key component of this company, right? That's what picks what you see. It's very sophisticated. It's very advanced. It's very powerful. They're going to be licensing that to a consortium of Americans. Who is among that consortium?
Yeah, it's like the old Monday Night Football intro. What's a little different? It's like, it's all my crony friends are coming over tonight. We got Larry Ellison with Oracle. Oracle, he's the second richest person in the world. They've already been managing the data for TikTok in the U.S. as like a step towards trying to alleviate some of these privacy concerns. You've got the Murdoch family, the people who own Fox News. And so, like, they're apparently going to be involved. You've got Michael Dell and Andreessen Horowitz and Silver Lake Capital. So these very prominent, well-known, very connected entities backed the winning play, so to speak, as was selected by the Trump administration.
Yeah, and I think part of the issue here is it's unclear what the process was in deciding which American investor group was going to get this deal with ByteDance, TikTok. We know that there was an open process. We know there were other companies. I think Amazon tried, Microsoft tried, but we don't know the criteria. We don't know how the selection process was done. Clearly, many of the names you mentioned of the winning group are people that are at least warm to Trump as opposed to hostile to Trump. They're friendly to Trump.
Yeah, the person behind Blue Sky did not get selected.
Right, exactly. But we also know that this had to be approved, that this investing consortium had to be approved by the Trump administration, specifically the Treasury Department, but also by the Chinese, right? Because the Chinese first didn't want to do the sale. And then if they said we might be open to a partial sale or this kind of arrangement, we need to be able to approve the deal. So they apparently have signed off on it as well, but we don't really know the terms at this point, right? We don't know how much they're being paid. We know that it's an 80-20 deal, 80% going to be American owned, 20% owned by ByteDance, the parent company in China, and that the American investors are going to have control over the data, and over the algorithm, or at least oversight of the algorithm. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And the algorithm's a big part of this, and we'll talk about that. But there's 7 board seats. So just think about this. I mean, we are in this weird spot where you've got TV personalities being taken off the air and then coming back on. You got the FCC kind of weighing in on that. And you've got the Trump administration essentially brokering a deal between a foreign government and private entities in which this algorithm, which, as you have reported, is a Chinese state secret, and that is the key. People say buying TikTok without the algorithms like buying a Ferrari without the engine. And there's some suspicions about why the algorithm will change and what it's done thus far. But no, absolutely. There's going to be 7 board seats. I think China gets to have like a board seat, and then the other 6 are Trump appointed.
Yeah. So let's unpack this a little bit on a couple levels. First of all, I think that if TikTok is going to be rescued, this is the kind of deal or arrangement that you want. But you have to step back and ask the larger question, should TikTok be rescued? And we've done a lot of research. We reported a lot of this in Blood Money about the origins of this company. It's a very, very different company. When you think of Chinese media companies, they're usually based in Shanghai. This one's actually based in Beijing, which of course the seat of power. Their headquarters is literally just down the street from the Ministry of State Security, and they do joint projects with the Chinese Ministry of State Security. And there's a very interesting timing here as far as the origins of this.
So pause.
Yeah.
So what you're about? So if this was TikTok, this would be maybe Drag Queen Story Hour. Instead, it's it's the drill down. So it's Peter Schweizer reads from his own book. Like, listen to this. This is huge, and I think this is the most important context to evaluate any TikTok discussion, because while it is the most popular app in the world with 1.2 billion users and all this stuff, listen to how it started as told by Peter Schweizer.
Yeah. So in August 2013, at the Communist Party's National Propaganda and Ideology Work Conference, President Xi of China explained China's need to have more sophisticated propaganda. Innovation, he said, was in order. Quote, "We must meticulously and properly conduct external propaganda, innovating external propaganda methods, working hard to create new concepts, new categories, and new expressions." End quote. As he directed in 2016, the year before TikTok was launched, quote, "Wherever the readers are, wherever the viewers are, that is where propaganda reports must extend their tentacles." A year later, TikTok emerged, and that all-important algorithm that is what drives this company was actually created by ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, but also the Chinese state. So it is not just a company secret, it is a state secret. So this is unlike any other tech company. And when people say, oh, it's just a Chinese company, it's not just a Chinese company. It's deeper than that. So that is what led us to the point where people said, wait a minute, we're allowing the Chinese Communist Party literally to have access to our children using a sophisticated algorithm that has all kinds of concerning side effects and influences.
Well, and remember this, a 2020 study from the Frontiers in Psychology journal found that TikTok was the most highly addictive of all social media platforms in existence, and it has wreaked significant havoc on a generation of American youth. As we'll discuss, the American youth are getting a different version of TikTok than elsewhere. That's key in the world. In fact, so just as a part of the discussion, listen to what an analyst on CNBC reminded us about this, and then we'll talk about so wait, this is happening, and let's compare what's happening from the place that invented TikTok, and then what's happening with the people that just bought it.
What do you think about the ownership stake in terms of how much China will own, and does that matter in terms of national security?
Yeah, I think the thing that really matters is the algorithm, right? They have our data from the 170 million users, okay. The important thing here is the algorithm. This thing is banned in China. TikTok's banned in China. I don't think that gets remembered often enough. It's not allowed in China.
Right, but it's not allowed not in China for national security reasons. It's not allowed in China because of whatever you believe it does to the people there, or to people generally. Right. That's a whole different story.
That is, well, not really. It's all influence and information operations. They're serving up content and creating a narrative in different societies around the world that they would like to propagate.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing that I don't think anybody really disputes, right? that what China's doing, the fact that it is banned in China, the TikTok videos you get in the United States are very different than the Chinese version, which is called Douyin, where it's like cooking, scientific experiments. Those are the kind of videos you're getting in China. You're not getting people with blue hair, screaming and shouting at the camera.
Well, and that matters, and we'll talk about how it's impacting American youth. But just to the point, like in addition to the content being more educational in nature and not so much blue hair, the Chinese version actually is off from 10 o'clock at night to 6 o'clock in the morning. There are limits to 40 minutes a day. They have built-in breaks with messages to these Chinese youth saying, put your phone down. So, but it's just notable that feature is not offered in the United States version.
Yeah, that's right. And look, there is a broader discussion you can have about what should be the role of the government in restricting social media use. I get all that, but it's not in dispute, I don't think, that the Chinese have used TikTok to push certain agendas and themes and propaganda among Western audiences. The only pushback to that is people saying they don't think it's effective. And the problem is, as I highlighted in Blood Money, and there's a lot of other evidence out there as well, they're very sophisticated in the way they do this. They know what they're doing. It has an effect. They've invested a lot of time and energy into it. So that is what brought us to the point where a deal was necessary. And now the question is in the way the deal is structured, are these American companies, are Larry Ellison, are the Murdochs, are the other owners, Michael Dell, are they actually going to be able to go in and exert control and influence over the algorithm to make sure it's not pushing the propaganda aspects of what China wants? Or are they going to kind of turn a blind eye because they're going to be making money? Because this is a highly, highly, highly profitable company.
But it's a highly addictive product.
Yeah, that's why it's profitable.
With incredibly negative impact. So just a couple things. There's a 2022 Pew Research Center study that said 67% of teens, 67% of teens between 13 and 17 are impacted by this. They said that they found the digital space contains over-exaggerating content that shapes teenagers' values in a misleading way. They found that the algorithm funnels mentally and emotionally damaging content, including suicide and eating disorders, to adolescents within minutes of creating a profile. A Washington Post undercover investigation found that it directed harmfully persuasive visuals to teen. Actually, that's for the New York Post. And in fact, the New York Post featured a column by one person who said that they felt brainwashed into pursuing, a gender transition lifestyle because of the content they consumed on TikTok. And that, by the way, that you saw this massive explosion of this happen during the pandemic when everyone was inside and everyone was on their phone. So, TikTok has not had a positive impact on American culture. No one disputes that. China's owned it before. Your point was like, will we care more or less now if Americans are making money off of this?
Yeah, and the argument is
Trump connected Americans.
Yeah, and here's the thing. The argument has always been all social media does this. Like Facebook, if you spend all day on Facebook, if you spend all day on Twitter X or many of the other platforms, Instagram, it's not going to have a positive effect. The argument has been that TikTok is even worse because it's completely visual, right? It's all videos. Unlike Twitter, at least you're reading, and the way you process information when you read is different than just being bombarded with visual images. You don't have the propagandistic aspect of it from a foreign government, but that TikTok is worse, and are the negative parts of it going to be transformed and changed? Because here's the question: if they shut down TikTok tomorrow, and the way
which they will not do,
the law says that it needs to be sold or it needs to be shut down, and the way they were going to shut it down is it was not going to be updated, and eventually it would just sort of fall apart as an app. The problem is if you shut down TikTok, it's not as if another one is not going to emerge. And if you look at a lot of what's happening in social media, there are a lot of Chinese companies that are pushing all kinds of new social media platforms. So you're going to face this problem again. It's like whack-a-mole. And the people who think, well, if we get rid of TikTok, then the whole problem goes away. There's no permanent solution. This is going to be an ongoing battle and an ongoing war. So if we can deal with the negative effects of TikTok, I think a deal like this is a good idea as opposed to the alternatives. But it is going to be an ongoing war, and we need to be vigilant. And just because it's going to be owned by Americans, if this deal is approved, doesn't mean that the problem is solved.
Well, hold on, because like when we say owned by Americans, it's still 20% owned by China.
Correct.
And it's still 20% owned by a country that the Supreme Court said we're allowed to consider as a foreign adversary. And I know, if you listen to this program, you heard Bill O'Reilly last week say he went to China and it's like, look, we can do a deal, guys. And good luck, Bill. But, they're trying to get him out of the fentanyl business. They're trying to get him out of the TikTok business. But your reporting in Blood Money and elsewhere, I mean, the decades of ideological and mental warfare they're waging against the United States, it doesn't go away just because you've seen a shift in the ownership stake, right?
No, well, it does. It doesn't to the extent that who controls the company determines what behavior is going to be acceptable. But the question is, are the American owners going to stay, if the 20% Chinese ownership says, hey, we really want to do this, or no, leave the algorithm the way it is, are the American owners going to exert their authority and their power and their majority stake and say, no, we're not going to tolerate that?
So the word that's being used is retrained.
Yeah.
And that the algorithm is going to be retrained, and Oracle will oversee and make sure that, there's no U.S. data that makes its way to China.
Right.
But just, the algorithm has been compared just in terms of the visual of the swiping down is like a slot machine.
Yeah.
And obviously, and it's notable that I think there are some Vegas-connected people that are involved.
They love their casinos.
In this deal. And so, but just one social media expert wrote about the TikTok algorithm, quote, many users claim it knows them better than they know themselves.
Yeah.
A sentiment that has evolved into a curious mix of spiritual belief and conspiracy theorizing. Other scholars have similarly noted that users feel more intimately seen and known by TikTok's algorithm than those powering other platforms. So, I mean, that's where it was. Now there is some speculation that because of the, just like Tesla's stopped being like a cool liberal thing since Elon Musk bought it.
Right.
TikTok, now that it's controlled by Trump allies, may stop being a place where people of a certain political persuasion go. And so therefore their lack of content may impact the algorithm moving forward. I mean, that's one theory.
Yeah. No, that's certainly a possibility. And that's why if you have this marketplace, I think that's a good thing. I mean, there all are alternatives out there. I'm going to get them wrong. I think Reels is that one that Facebook Meta has. I think it's called Reels. There are alternative platforms, but TikTok is the big monster. I mean, that's the one that dominates this market. So, look, I hate to be a pessimist on this. It's only going to get worse. These algorithms are going to get smarter as AI becomes more advanced. It's going to know us better. That is only going to get worse. And then the larger question becomes, should the government be stepping in, as they do in China, and say at 10 o'clock at night, this thing is being shut off and it will turn back on at 6 o'clock in the morning? And do you want the government doing that? And I think you can make an argument as a parent of, yeah, we need that help. But the civil libertarian in me says no. I mean, it shouldn't be the state that's determining that. Parents need to sort of confiscate the kids' phones and say, you're going to bed and you can't watch this stuff.
I like the idea. Of you going into your child's bedroom and like, no, Dad, like free market. Like, why can't I just do whatever I want? You're like, tonight we're Chinese. State control. but only education videos for you. But it just shows you like the tension that exists. I will say this, one thing that is noteworthy here, and we talk a lot about this. We did this documentary film called The Creepy Line about Google and Facebook, and in earlier version of this debate, because they're collecting a lot of information about us, and they had really strong relationships in the government, and what do we allow them to do, and how heavily do we regulate that? In some ways, this is the same conversation, but just now you've got Chinese influence, and it's a new technology. But one of the things we always say is it takes a long time for governments to catch up to the technology in terms of how do we regulate it, right? And we always use the example, cars existed for a long time before we made seatbelts.
Yeah.
And so this is the first kind of a seatbelt for this specific technology, but the presence of Trump-connected people who now stand to profit off of this makes you wonder, like, are we having conversations about safety or profitability?
Yeah, and that's where you need to have transparency in this process. And I haven't seen how these, different proposals were evaluated. How did Amazon stack up against this consortium? There needs to be transparency in these cases, because I think we need to recognize that elected officials from whatever party, whoever they are, if they have a chance to look out and help their friends, they're going to look out and they're going to help their friends. That's why you need to have transparency. Was this the best bid? Maybe, but we don't know. So there's the lack of transparency. And, we want to make sure that the government is not tipping the scales, as we've seen in the past. Remember all the pressure that was put on Twitter by the Biden administration when it came to healthcare, when it came to political content, when it came to Hunter Biden. The way you respond to that is not by doing it yourself. Mm-hmm. The way you respond by that is calling it out, because that's where most people are. Most people want to have free speech, open speech. I would apply the same thing to the Jimmy Kimmel situation. I think everybody, including me, said what he said was outrageous. He shouldn't be on the air, and we have a right to say that. I have a little bit more of a concern when the head of the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission starts talking like that. He's the regulator who is in charge of regulating that industry. He has the full force of the federal government. He needs to stay out of that conversation. If that happened in the Biden administration, I'd be saying the same thing. And I don't think Trump's head of the FCC should be doing the same thing.
Jimmy Kimmel is back on the air. So too is Jimmy Fallon, who, it should be noted, as you reported in your book, Jimmy Fallon was the first U.S. celebrity to promote TikTok, had a deal with the Chinese government. He says on air, hey, there's this new app, and nobody kind of knew about it. Then he kind of leads the charge. He's followed by Ellen DeGeneres and your favorite musician, Cardi B. So they all but that's how it grew. So China did co-opt the American celebrities, just to kind of bring it back full circle.
ByteDance did do a deal with Jimmy Kimmel.
Fallon.
Sorry, Jimmy Fallon. I always get the two of them confused because I never watched them.
Well, you're not alone in that regard. I will say this. Here's some positive news, because it did be sold to Larry Ellison and the Murdochs. And some people might be concerned about that. Amazon put in a bid. Frank McCourt put in a bid. And so we have some concerns moving forward because of everything we've just discussed, and China maintains an interest in it. But it could be worse, Peter Schweizer, because one of the other people who put in a bid that was not selected, the guy behind OnlyFans. And so if you think TikTok's bad now, I'm just saying it could have got a lot worse.
It could have gotten a lot worse.
It's still kid friendly.
Yeah, exactly. And look, here's the thing in the context of TikTok. TikTok itself does not create the content. It's a platform. So it's different from Fox News, where Fox News says, here are the shows, and those shows can drive the conversation. What you want is a platform that is free and open. There was a lot of criticism of Elon Musk when Elon Musk bought Twitter, turned it into X. A lot of people thought he was going to become biased. I think it's actually been more open than it was under previous ownership. And a lot of the people on the left went and started that alternative. What was it? Blue Sky, which I think is kind of nothing and was frankly filled with a lot of hate when Charlie Kirk died. But my point is, you can run a platform like TikTok in an above open way. And let's hope the new owners do that. I think there are encouraging signs, if only because there's going to be more accountability, because the owners now can have their ass hauled up before Congress, as opposed to ByteDance executives. They didn't have to show up when Congress was upset about TikTok. So there's going to be a greater level of accountability. On that level, I'm encouraged.
Wait, let's just end there, because you made that point when we were having this discussion initially. And I think that actually is a very important thing. And back to the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing, the reason why you rationalize having Jimmy Kimmel be suspended is he's on ABC. There's a federal license. So there is a federal oversight role in the particular platform Jimmy Kimmel has. But what you just said is a big deal. Now that it is U.S. owned, potentially TikTok, they therefore have to be responsive to U.S. oversight, unlike the previous iteration.
Yeah, they went through the motions before. ByteDance or TikTok executives in the U.S. would go and appear before Congress, and they would say, no, the Chinese government has no role. No, but the big dogs, the guys that actually ran the company in China, they never showed up. There was no oversight of them. They didn't have to respond to congressional subpoenas. If the Republicans or the Democrats are in charge and they're frustrated with what's going on with TikTok, they can bring these guys up to Capitol Hill and ask them, have them answer questions under oath. So that's the kind of oversight that I think is good and healthy. My view is you have to have a balance between my libertarian instincts and the recognition that these are powerful companies. We want them to be controlled by Americans as opposed to hostile foreign powers. But even when they're controlled about Americans, they have a lot of power and a lot of influence that can affect young people. As you talked about, they're highly addictive. They can be highly damaging. And so we need to maintain oversight, even if it's owned by Americans.
Well, I will say, I think that, we joke about it, but I do think you deserve a lot of credit in the work that went into the book Blood Money, because I do think like that was the first sort of stanza in what became a national conversation about TikTok that ultimately culminated in both sides of Congress agreeing, yeah, hey, we should make China sell this thing for exactly. And so I think partly as a result of that, there's no doubt, as a result of that conversation, which I think your book helped start, that's no longer the case. The ownership of TikTok will now be responsive to U.S. oversight, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic about this deal. The devil's in the details, as they always say, but I'm cautiously optimistic. It's moving in the right direction. We need to make sure that they do actually control the algorithm and that there is oversight. They're making sure that China's not manipulating in some hidden way and that they're asleep at the switch. So final thoughts. Are you going to open up a TikTok account?
I will not open up a TikTok account, but I will open up one for you, because I do see you listening to Cardi B, and when the way you dance, it kind of like touch your head a little bit. It could be like that Night at the Roxbury SNL characters, so I don't know. No, but we may, now that we no longer have the security concerns, who knows what the future for drill down and GAI-related content on TikTok may be.
Yeah, we might do a dance version of the podcast. Well, we appreciate you, as always, taking the time to listening to us. We know your time is valuable. You can find out more about the work we do at thedrilldown.com. And please hit the subscribe button for this podcast. We appreciate your encouragement and support. Thanks again. Until next time.